I just want to welcome everyone to the Arctic Environmental Humanities Symposium. I'm Adriana Kratchoun. My co-convener is Michael Bravo at Cambridge University. I'm here at Boston University. I'm really excited about today's event, and we're going to have 4 speakers who have written or edited 2 very exciting new collections about Svalbard. And we actually all met last month at the Svalbard Science Conference in Oslo, Norway. Actually, Zdenka and I met the week before in Svalbard, where she was launching her book. And I'll just say briefly that we all feel in the social sciences and humanities feel passionately about the importance of engaging with the social sciences and humanities in conversations, public conversations about the Arctic, because so much of it is done through the lens of the natural sciences and through a focus on climate change for reasons that we all understand and support. But we also think that it's important to engage the humanities. And we're all part of what's called the Svalbard Social Science Initiative that's working to make stronger connections to the sciences in the Arctic. So that's by way of background for how this session came to be, because we were all there presenting and trying to collaborate with the sciences. So we have 2 collections. We're going to start, I think we'll start with Zdenka. We have 2 essays. I'm going to introduce everyone briefly. So Zdenka Sokolíčková is the author of The Paradox of Svalbard, Climate Change and Globalization in the Arctic. She's a cultural anthropologist interested in environmental and climate change, globalization, tourism, science, migration, and social justice. She lived in Longyearbyen, which is the main town in Svalbard, with her 3 children and husband during her ethnographic fieldwork from 2019 to 2021 as a guest researcher at the Department of Social Anthropology at the University of Oslo. She's currently living in the Czech Republic, working as a postdoc at the Pardee Center in the Netherlands. In 2023, she has begun shifting her ethnographic focus to Antarctic tourism. And we also have today the 3 co-editors of an important new collection out from Palgrave this year, Svalbard Imaginaries. Our 3 editors who will be speaking a bit about the collection as a whole, which is a very interdisciplinary collection, as well as their own work on Svalbard, are here with us today. First, we have Mathias Albert, who is a professor of political science at the Faculty of Sociology at the University of Bielefeld. His research interests are in the history and sociology of world politics, the politics and science of the polar regions, as well as in youth studies. Dina Brode-Roger holds a PhD in cultural studies. She's the second co-editor from KU Leuven, where she is a research fellow. Her current projects, all based in Svalbard, include exploring an embodied understanding of place and use of visual methods of inquiry. In 2022, she received the Rachel Tanner Memorial Visual Sociology Award. Our third co-editor is Lisbeth Iverson. She's been working in an adjunct position at the Nansen Environmental and Remote Sensing Center in Bergen from 2013 to 2023, working on community-based monitoring and citizen science in the Arctic. She co-authored the book Community-Based Monitoring of the Arctic, published in 2021. She was now finalizing her public sector PhD at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design at the Institute of Urbanism and Landscape. Her main research topics are participatory planning, co-creation, placemaking, and place leadership. So we're going to start with Zdenka, then we'll have the 3 co-editors present their collection. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the organizers for arranging this and for inviting me. I'm quite thrilled. It's also intimidating to see that many people joined the symposium, but it's also very nice because it feels, it gives you a feeling of satisfaction seeing that people are interested in your work and in Svalbard. So I'm really glad that I can be here. So this is the book we're talking about, The Paradox of Svalbard, which was published in July this year in a paperback form in London by Pluto Press. And the subtitle is Climate Change and Globalization in the Arctic. This book is, I will just briefly introduce how it happened that the book exists at all, and what the structure is and why. And they then say a couple of words that I wanted to share with you guys. So this book is the main publication output of my research project. Adriana kindly introduced me, so you know already about the background of the project. And it is an ethnographic study, an in-depth ethnographic study. When I came to Svalbard, I was not able to speak Norwegian yet, so I only had access to information about the archipelago and the town of Longyearbyen in English. And in the English-speaking sources, you get the climate change story very much. That's the main story that is being told about the place, and that was also the main kind of interest that sparked the idea to go there to do the ethnographic study, because I was collaborating by then with my mentor, Thomas Hyland Eriksen, who's also the author of the foreword to the book. He's a Norwegian social anthropologist, and he introduced the concept or the perspective of overheating as a perspective to look at things that are speeding up, an acceleration of an acceleration. And in his project that he was having prior to mine, they were looking at how both climate change and globalization impacts local communities, because it does impact all over the world, but in different ways, as we know. But they haven't included an Arctic case study. And Longyearbyen from the outside seemed like a place that is indeed changing very fast. And the climate/environmental part was very visible for an English speaker. So I went there and started to do ethnographic fieldwork using the typical methods of participant observation, conducting interviews, learning the vernacular, being there, this immersing yourself in the social life of the community and living your real family life also there, which was a must for me at the time, but also an asset, I think, of the project, of the research, and hopefully also of the text then. So the entrance point was how people live with accelerated change, how they perceive these changes. And I was starting from the environmental point of view, but very soon I discovered that climate change is not the only story in town, and there is much more happening indeed. There is a very rapid and profound economic change when the town is shifting from coal mining to tourism and research and development. And that brings together also quite rapid demographic changes since the 1990s, when the town still was a predominantly Norwegian company town, to super diverse, as I argue in the book, pretty international cosmopolitan place with very many nationalities being represented in this tiny village. When you think how far we are beyond the Arctic Circle and how little the village actually is, it is indeed extremely diverse when you look at from within. And so that is also how the book is being structured into these three parts that are called fluid environments, extractive economies, and disempowered communities. I'm not sure whether you who have registered for the seminar got these materials that you probably have sent out a sample chapter 5, so which is approximately from the middle of the book, from the extractive economies part, and then disempowered communities it ends with. So what I'm trying to do in the book is that I'm unpacking my research and what I learned from my participants. I've conducted quite many interviews, but obviously since I was interested in how people live with change, it was very important for me to get to those who have actually experienced it themselves. Longyearbyen is a very fluid community. People come and go, and that means that there is only a handful of people that have their own lived experience of staying and living through these changes for several decades in town. So those were, let's say, my key informants. Some of them also became my friends, and one of them is the author of the afterword, Hilde Henningsen, who has been living in Longyearbyen for more than 30 years. So I'm taking it from the climate and environmental perspective, but then diving deeper into what all these changes mean on the economic level and how people perceive them, and also showing, I was probably quite naive, thinking that I will come to a place where everybody is concerned about climate change and there are no climate change deniers. But then I started to understand that for many people, the economic change, this shift from coal mining to tourism and research, is much more profound, and it's touching their life stories in a much stronger way. And I'm trying to show that, for example, in the chapter that some of you might have read. And also something that I was not aware that much before I came to the field was this aspect of a changed texture of the population and what that does, and the social inequalities that are on rise, and segregation and language barrier and Norwegianization, the geopolitical game that then translates on the local level through privileging some segments of the population over others. And that was also a very powerful story to tell, next to the perception of climate and environmental change. So I'm not trying to argue that those issues are not important, but I'm trying to say that they're as equally important for the people who live through these changes. And maybe it's really difficult to summarize a work like that just in a couple of sentences. But sometimes I'm being asked this question, when social scientists are being challenged, like, what is the main finding then of your research? And I've tried to formulate this in a crisp way. And I think I'm trying to say that there is this narrative of Longyearbyen being a possible showroom of sustainability, that the Norwegian government would like to develop this place into a showroom of how we can live in a greener and more sustainable future. But very often in this picture, the social aspects of this are being forgotten, or they're being denied, or they're just being hidden, unspoken about. And I felt that it's impossible to narrate a trustworthy story about sustainability if you forget about the societal aspects, and if you forget about the people who are there, So I'm trying to argue that a story about sustainability must include all these three pillars that have always existed in the core of the sustainability concept: the environmental, the economic, and the social one. And people who live through these changes need to be able to claim active agency and feel that they are allowed, that they can claim the future of the place that they call home. And this is being hindered in Longyearbyen in various quite interesting ways, and some of them I'm trying to unveil in the text. And perhaps as my concluding remarks, I would like to say that I have gotten some positive feedback from my colleagues that have noticed the book, but what I value most is that it seems that the book is being read locally, that people that I've spoken to or others that my informants recommend the book to their friends and fellows, feeling that they identify with the story as I paint it, with the help of all the stories that people have shared with me. And that's something that, in the times within social anthropology, a discipline with such a colonial history, I think it's very urgent and up to date, this discussion today about giving back and not being extractive. And I've really been thinking about this question a lot throughout my work, and also when I was producing the text. So it feels in a way, rewarding when you see that in a way you have been working with people, but at the end of the day you're writing about them, right? So there is this relationship or a sort of a distance, but then when people get back to you saying that I can identify with the story as you, or the many stories, the manifold paradoxes that you unpack in the book, that's a very important feedback. But obviously I would be interested in the feedback of my colleagues and the audience today, so I'm curious to hear your comments and questions. And thanks again for giving me space to introduce my work here.
Thank you so much, Zdenka. So I think we'll move to Mathias, who will introduce the Svalbard Imaginaries collection.
Okay, thank you very much, Adriana, for inviting us. I'm glad to see you all. I will start saying a bit about our book, and agree that Dina and Lisbeth then can join in. I'm also happy, incidentally, to not see, but at least know from the list of names that some of the contributors to this book are also online. I do see Eva Lacour, I see Sam Seville, I think I saw Ulrich Schildberg earlier on, but there are simply too many names here, so I think just me. Zhang was also there, but I haven't systematically checked. Now, let me start by saying that both projects, well, our project emerged within the context of the Svalbard Social Science Initiative. The Svalbard Social Science Initiative emerged while Zdenka was already at her work. So there are, of course, relations here. And first thing I need to say is that the Svalbard Social Science Initiative, which I would all like to invite you to have a look at, is definitely more than its name suggests. It definitely also covers the humanities and even beyond. It's not just social sciences. And within the context of the Svalbard Social Science Initiative, many of its members actually met in Longyearbyen. I think that was 2 years ago, a bit more than 2 years ago. And one group thought about how can we actually think about the present, but also in the light of the past and the future of Svalbard through as many angles as possible, but not in an entirely arbitrary way, coming up with the idea that we use the concept of imaginaries. Now, imaginaries are admittedly not an easy concept, but generally, I guess one could say it is a way of how people make sense of their surroundings, the social world, the natural world, and place themselves within it. And what we attempted more or less, and nothing less, is to look at that quite special place. And I think we could also maybe later on have a discussion what makes this place so special, what makes Svalbard so special, from as many angles as possible, using this concept of imaginaries as a lens. And while, so to speak, if you allow me to contrast that, well, Zdenka's approach has been to deeply immerse herself in the locality. And it's, of course, a single author project. In our edited collection, we wanted to bring together as many people as possible who could look at these various imaginaries that make up what Svalbard is and conceivably can be in the future from different angles and from very, very different disciplinary perspectives. So this is, in a sense, a rather hyper-disciplinary project that we have here. And what I would basically do is run you through not every chapter, but the structure of the book. So it hopefully becomes clear what I mean by hyperdisciplinarity. Oh, incidentally, I forgot to mention, I can unfortunately not hold it up because at least I did not receive any print copies yet. It's been out for a few weeks only, but it's online. So what we basically did is we structured this book into 4 main parts. And the first part is the part which would usually come to mind of most people that study international politics or study international law. And what makes Svalbard special in one specific sense, namely that it is a territory that is covered by a very, very special and unusual treaty, the Svalbard Treaty, which confers sovereignty to Norway, acknowledges Norwegian sovereignty, but gives extensive use rights to the citizens of the signatory states. And this raises all kinds of interesting questions, and these have been covered by a chapter that was done by Roald Berg and Klaus Dotz on how Svalbard was framed as a geopolitical space and factor, and a chapter by Christoph Humrich who looks at the very specific tensions and imaginaries that arise from the fact that Svalbard is a Norwegian sovereign is a place under Norwegian sovereignty, but in a sense also a very, very international space, and also in legal terms, and the many, many discussions that pertain to what follows from this. Now, this is the traditional political science law discourse on Svalbard. There are books written on this, very large books written on this. One could say you don't need another one, but it's definitely an important aspect that you need to cover if you want to paint, as we try to do, such a comprehensive picture. Now, the second part we called imaginaries through images. The Svalbard Treaty is a text, printed text, letters, but much of how people make sense of places and how they imagine it to be is through images of various kinds. And here we have 4 fascinating chapters. I won't run through them all. So it ranges, for example, the first, just to mention the first 2 is Eva Lacour, who is also here, and Sam Seville, who is also here. They analyzed how Svalbard was imagined in a particular kind of film, Hedda Grøndalsfilms of Svalbard that were shot in the mid to late 60s and early 70s. And Dina contributed a chapter looking at the television series Fortitude, and look at how Arctic imaginaries actually played out there, particularly also pertaining to Svalbard. Incidentally, for the German speakers here, I just this past Sunday watched a new television series, which was called The Seed, on German TV, German series, and it was shot 50% on Svalbard, and I definitely want also to have a look at this again and see how the Arctic imaginary plays out there. Third part is 2 chapters is on heritage and environments, because much of what goes on in Svalbard and how people think of it is visible in terms of physical structures. And these physical structures, on the one hand, of course, pertain to the remnants or the still existing parts of the mining industry and the industrial heritage. And as anyone currently being, or recently meaning the past couple of years having been in Longyearbyen, there's also a quite significant change in the urban landscape. The building activities are continue at quite a large pace. So we have a chapter on the imaginaries of company towns on Svalbard that was done by Ulrich Schildberg, and Peter Hammersham contributed a chapter on Svalbard's urban imaginaries. And then the fourth part is actually the one which we term living imaginaries, where I guess we really want to see how people in their everyday life in one way or the other imagine Svalbard. So I guess in a sense, this is the part of the edited volume that most closely connects to Zdenka's book. Lisbeth contributes on the collective imagination of the future of Svalbard communities, the various discourses that have been around there. Jasmine, who is also here, actually talks about experiences from doing fieldwork research on Svalbard. And last but not least, Martin Fiala, who is a guide on Svalbard, reflects on his notes he took over many years, guiding people on Svalbard, how their perception of it changes, and his own reflections over time as a result of this. So all in all, I mean, we have a quite, I think, very comprehensive and very wide attempt to look at what Svalbard is and what it will be through the various imaginaries that are at play. And I hope you will have a chance to look at this and look forward to your questions and answers. But before that, I would like to ask Dina and Lisbeth maybe to add something.
Yeah, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction to our collection, Mathias. I think not very much to add. I guess I would just like to underscore a little bit what you've already pointed to, and that is the variety that we had in these different chapters. And I think that's very important. I mean, one of the chapters that didn't really get mentioned too much, I just like to bring in, which is called Arctic Views, Virtual Remote Experiences. Only because this then brings in a whole different way of how do we understand what this place is. If we create a virtual place, a virtual space based on this place, what then is that? So we have a lot of different ways of imagining what Svalbard is and what we might expect it to be or what we think it is. The other thing that I also find quite interesting in terms of the different chapters is the way that some of them were written by people. Only one of them actually was written by someone who has never been to Svalbard. All the other people have been in Svalbard. And then in the ones that were written by people who have been to Svalbard, some people have lived there and some people have not. So these different understandings that everyone has, these different situated perspectives, are things that come out in the different chapters. And I think that's part of what is interesting when we look through all the different chapters and see how they're written. And you look and try to think about how different people understand and perceive what is an imaginary and what is Svalbard. So I think that these are overlapping themes that have already been brought up, but I just wanted to point to them one more time.
Thank you, Mathias and Dina. I just want to add that, you know, it has been a very important collaboration from the very first initiative to establish Svalbard social science initiatives. And one of the ideas was also to get broad knowledge into the arena so we could collaborate, inform each other as social scientists or people working in humanities, and not stress too much the local communities and be coordinated as researchers. So already there was an attempt to behave in a small place. So the fatigue of being asked about questions from researchers should not be too heavy on the local population. But maybe my main contribution and interest in the beginning and also now was to bring in the perspectives of environmental monitoring and climate change adaptation through the projects Carpardus and Interos, Horizon 2020 projects, where my main task was to look at community-based monitoring in environmental work and also citizen science and involvement of broad knowledge. And along the road, as I started with the PhD, the planning perspective and how the various, approaches from the local council's planning, where they implemented the United Nations sustainability goals, and then the state of Norway and the way they implemented new restrictions in the national park areas are very, very different. And there were also seen, not only by my work, but all of us, contradictions between the different policies nationally. Environmental policy or cultural heritage is supposed to just deteriorate and be left in the landscape, and yet it's international cultural heritage for all humankind. So it's in contradiction with the national, plans for how to deal with a cultural heritage. And on the other hand, we also saw in both my work and other people's work in Svalbard Social Science Initiative that there is a precautionary principle that is upfront when the national government is planning or implementing new legislation, like Zdenka also talked about, very much Norwegianness of the place, and yet it's not a complete municipality. And even over the last years, we have seen which many people talk about in this volume also, a lack of rights now to vote if you haven't been living 3 years on the mainland, etc. And also for youth living there in Svalbard with non-Norwegian parents. So the main idea has been to bring in perspectives of community-based monitoring, the importance of UN Sustainability Goal 16, strong institution, local democracy, partnership in planning, and also 17, which is about collaboration. And this is somehow lacking in what we found. Also, other researchers in Svalbard Social Science Initiative have been looking into the discrepancy between the national plans, Norwegian plans, but also between the way of planning for the future from national government and from the local council. So that's just some of the interest to see how we can bring in perspectives from climate adaptation research and community-based monitoring, those methods and approaches and values, and kind of shed a light on what is going on from the national level in Svalbard.